Doing well? All right, so a couple of housekeeping things. I think that there is, I don't know if you want to make an announcement about the questions. I think there's a way for you guys if you want to ask any questions. So you don't forget the question, you can text it, and then we'll actually collect all those questions at the end. Before I actually turn this to the other presentation, this is actually going to be running tonight and tomorrow. This is actually a couple of presentations about books that, I've learned a lot from these books. So if you want to actually grab any of these titles to search them after that, feel free to do this. So this weekend is going to be a very, very special weekend, partly because I think we're going to try to tackle a very tough topic, which is the topic of biological apologetics. And it's a really, really tough one because of many reasons when you're going to look at, and I think one of the great things about this meeting is that there's a lot of familiar faces that, I can recognize, people that I've had great conversations with. And the one thing that you have to come out of this, I would love to hear back from you because I learn a lot of times when you guys ask questions, I go back and search these questions. This has been for me a learning process to go back and do my own homework and my own research about this. And I would actually start with what I want to end with, is the very famous word, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, charity. We can have a big debate in this whole conference, and we end up losing each other, but you'll get at the end that there are some things that unite us, that some things that are absolutely essential, and those I want to make sure at the end that we have a clear understanding of. Why is this a big question? Well, number one, you can clearly, if anyone has read in the news, this is becoming a rising conflict between the church and the society. I think if there are two big things that you can think of in this current day and age that are causing a bit of conflict. Number one is civil liberties, okay? Number two is the conflict between science and religion. And I would say that conflict is a little bit of an apparent conflict. It's a little bit of a political conflict. And I would hope at the end of this retreat that I would resolve some of that conflict in your mind, that at least is not as bad as you think. When you look at actually, and I call the danger of education, you'll find something very interesting. And if you look at this, and I don't know if it's projecting pretty well, but if you actually look at the middle column, so here the middle column is like humans evolved and God had no part or process in this. Like God didn't do anything whatsoever. If you had a high school education and by the time you're done with your postgraduate degree, you had a threefold increase in people who said that God had nothing to do with it whatsoever. In fact, when you look at the other one, if you see that people who actually believe that humans have been in this present form as we know it less than 10,000 years, if you go from high school to graduate degree, that number goes to half. And by the way, these numbers are an average over the whole country. There's very well known in some very, very liberal universities, these numbers are even worse. That you go almost like if somebody has a graduate degree from some universities, they believe that God has anything to do with creation is probably less than 20 to 30%. So I call it, in some sense, well, you know what, all of us have to have an education, okay? But is that education dangerous? I don't think so. It challenges us and we need to be very well informed. But are we really under attack? And I would really try to quote the Pope or the Archpope of the atheists, that when he says, Richard Dawkins says, to levy, that their intention for the militant atheists is to levy an intense barrage of ridicule at religious moderate, to bully them into surrendering to atheism. I think that fence-sitters are likely to be swayed by a display of naked contempt. If I get something out of this meeting, I would like to tell you that there are many scientists who are at the same level of intelligence, if not smarter than Richard Dawkins, who absolutely believe in God and absolutely believe in science and are working in the science field to advance it to a very, very high level. So there is no reason for us to be bullied. There is absolutely no ground for us to be bullied in this area. Why is this a major issue? because it's a very tough issue. It's different than when you're talking about the existence of God and the philosophical argument. Why? Because over ages, the philosophy of existence of God, has not changed dramatically. Yeah, the arguments are a little bit different. But when you're talking about science, every single day there's a lot of scientific facts. So if you make a theological assumption based on the science of today, let's say the science changes tomorrow, what are you going to do? And you have to keep up with that field so much. Unfortunately or fortunately, it is a multidisciplinary area. For you to really make up your mind, you have to be very well knowledgeable in science, very well knowledgeable in biblical studies, biblical linguistics, historical studies, in theology, in philosophy. This area, biological apologetics, is an area where many domains meet. In fact, if you look, for example, at the ID movement, some of their top people who are actually advocating it, one of them is a lawyer. Philip E. Johnson is a lawyer, okay? Another one is a mathematician. So people, for example, somebody like Stephen Meyer is a person who deals with information and the science of information. So it tells you how tough this field is to make up your mind. Why is this a major issue? Because it's a major debate in the church. If you look at headlines, actually, several headlines, evangelical professors lost their jobs from their seminaries just because they've said, well, you know what, I'm entertaining a different interpretation of Genesis. In fact, if you look at actually Bruce Waltke is one of the most prominent Old Testament scholars in the country. He had to resign his position that he had been in for so long just because he said a comment about evolution. And then when you get somebody like Pope John Paul, okay, when he embraces evolution and says, you know what, I think evolution is the way that we were created. So you can get not only the Catholic, the Protestant, and the Orthodox Church, but even within the same church, we can't even agree on that. So you want to tell me why this is a very tough subject to do? Because when we're talking about existence of God, almost all of us will be on the same page. But when we talk about evolution, I can tell you, out of this crowd, we can come up with 100 different ideas. And we can really fight about it. So rules of engagement, and this is going to be for today, for tonight, and tomorrow until Sunday. Number one, it's an area of major complexity. I can tell you, the more I've done research in this area, the more humbled I've been. And I can't really go and tell about somebody, well, you know what, they don't know what they're doing. You know why? Because they've done their research. Even if I disagree with them, like for example, I'll say the young earth creationists, I don't agree with their science. But they've done quite a bit of good science, okay? And I have to be respectful of that. You'll know when we come into the lecture of the biblical interpretation, there are interpretations that are not going to match with what you believe in. But you got to, at least with some sense of humility, listen and learn from them, and don't just judge that they're heretical. Second thing, you have to understand and realize that within the mainstream Christianity, and I'm talking about mainstream, mainly the Orthodox, the Catholic, and mainstream evangelical beliefs, that you might be in this box. I can tell you from now, and don't be shocked, that you will find Christians that believe in something different, that's going to overlap with your belief. You might find some overlap. But trust me when I tell you, you might find a Christian who totally believes, and they are within this box, what I call mainstream Christianity. But their belief about creation, their belief about Genesis is totally different than yours. And I would really warn you from saying that they're heretical just because of that. I don't think that's fair. Yes, there are some views outside, and I will tell you the ones outside of this box. I think that we as an Orthodox Church have to really do our research and know where we're at. I don't think we necessarily have to agree with all those Christians. I don't think we necessarily need to. But I think we have to be careful about just saying they're heretical because their view on the biblical interpretation or their view on evolution is different. The purpose of this is not to convince you with one view or the other. I'm not going to try to convince you with my view. I'm going to present to you, and I'm going to be very careful about this. I'm going to present to you today and tomorrow and on Sunday the opposing views for evolution on both sides, as well as biblical interpretation. What you need to do is you need to do your research. I've given you a lot of books, and I'll give you a lot of ideas. You need to go and do your research and do it well before you make up your mind. What I want to get out at the end is that you, if you wherever field you're in, if you're in the scientific area, that would be great. If not, if you're in law, if you're in public service, whatever it is, I want you to come out of this with a cohesive, unconflicted opinion of evolution and creation. And when I mean cohesive, that you don't feel inside yourself that there's something that doesn't make sense. The problem, what you guys face in college, what you face in university, is that you find a lot of people who tell you it doesn't make sense. They put inside you a confusion. And at the end, when you're confused and you don't get the answers, you lose faith in the Bible, in the church, in everything. And I don't want that to happen. The bottom line, and this is what I'm going to actually end with, no matter what your belief is about the details of Genesis, no matter what you believe about the details of evolution, there are 3 facts all Christians in this debate agree upon. And if you agree on those 3 facts, I think that would be all that what it takes. And trust me when I tell you, the simplest man and woman in the villages, in the places that we go and serve, believe in these 3 facts and are saved based upon them. Those 3 facts. Number 1, God created all. That's it, simply. You can go and ask somebody in the village and tell them how. He'll tell you, like, you know what, I don't really care. I'm not telling you that we have to completely ignore it. If you want to search it, that's fine. But you know what? The details of the how doesn't take away from the fact that God was created it. Number 2, God created all good for good. One of the biggest problems about the Darwinistic view of evolution is that the process is so random and the outcome is so unpredictable that it could be either good or bad. And by the way, because you fall sick and you get a cancer and you die at the end, and that is evil, so then God did not create it, because how can He create something that is good? That is a wrong assumption. When God created, it created it all good. And number 3, God created all good for us to enjoy the relationship. There is a sense of glory, and you'll look at actually this debate that actually there is a big part about who you are and how you believe that God looks to you and relates to you. It's not only that God created it, it's not only that God created all for good, it is God that created all for good so that you would enjoy this glorious relationship with Him. So you and I can disagree about the details of evolution. You and I can disagree about the details of how to interpret Genesis. But I hope at the end that we agree on all those 3 things. That's the bottom line. So how is this weekend going to go? Well, there are going to be 4 lectures, and I'm going to have to actually walk you through this because there is a lot of thought process. It's very easy for me to come and tell you right now the argument with or against evolution, but I think this is just actually going to be an argument in vacuum. You need to understand the background. You need to understand the history behind it. So it can really make sense when you're, let's say you adopt evolution, okay? You have to understand where did this argument come from. So the first lecture is that your worldview determines how you think and your conclusion. I will tell you something, guys, and trust me when after a lot of research, I figured out something really interesting. You can be looking at the same exact scientific results, same exact ones, and come up with a completely different conclusion about God creation because of your assumptions and your presuppositions and your worldview. So when you're debating with another person, it's not necessarily you're debating the science. You're debating their philosophical assumption, which is very important. So number 1, your worldview determines your conclusions. The second lecture for tomorrow, biological evolution, the pros and the cons, okay? And I'm going to present to you from a scientific standpoint, how do people who favor evolution from a Christian standpoint, how do they defend it? And trust me when I tell you, they've got some really, really good arguments. How do people who are against evolution are against it, and why? And they've got some very valid arguments. So that's going to be tomorrow morning. And then the third one would be Genesis. I've actually debated quite a bit which one to start with. Whether to start with evolution first or the Genesis first. I decided to go with evolution first. Do you know why? Because the Christians who look at evolution and they come up with theological answers, a lot of them start from the point of where you're at. They're in the scientific field and they're struggling with the data. And I want you to look at the data first. I want you to look at the scientific data. But then I want to actually culminate with looking at Genesis 1 to 3. And basically, can we reach an agreement? That is going to be tomorrow afternoon. And then the last one, which is very, very, very dear to my heart. Our past, our sense of creation and evolution, honestly determines a lot of what we are right now. And we're going to talk a little bit about the issue of biomedical ethics and biological ethics. Does evolution impact how we look at abortion? Does evolution impact how we look at contraception? Does evolution impact how we look at stem cell research? Does evolution impact how we look at end-of-life care? Does evolution look at eugenics? And can we make out of ourselves superhuman beings? Is that okay? Well, some people are going to say yes. Some people within the mainstream Christianity are going to say, why are we against advancement? It has been labeled that Christianity, we're against scientific advancement. Is that the case? And I labeled this last lecture, this is going to be Sunday, that as we're going to look into the past of our evolution and our creation, it's going to impact a lot of how we're going forward in this country, with a lot of debates going on. I always say that God does not need defending, but people need to understand. God is able to defend himself, but we need to be well informed, just like Peter said in his first epistle. Be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. I can tell you, when you go to your own college and an atheist scientist will come and tell you you can't believe in science and believe in God, I'll tell him, you know what? It's not yours to take away. I can believe in my science. In my area of interventional cardiology, I deal with science every day. I deal with life and death every day. I deal with the most advanced things in medicine that anyone can use. I deal with life and death that when I shock somebody out of death, I revive them. And I'm a big believer in that, and I will do it every day of my career. But I also believe that what I've been given as a gift of God. And I enjoy that gift. And I enjoy the fact that when somebody's revived from their death by our medical technology, I enjoy that that's a gift of God. But when I lose the battle and that person dies, I never make a God out of myself. It was not mine to revive. I never make a God out of myself. That's the problem with modern medicine. That's the problem with modern technology. It is a great gift, but we can make a God out of it. And that's an issue. But don't let anyone to tell you that modern science cannot be enjoyed with the same way that you enjoy your Creator. Pontius Pilate asked Christ many, many years ago, 2,000 years ago, what is truth? And this is still the question. And I would tell you, why do you need to care about the truth as an introduction? I think it's a matter of identity. I think one of the biggest things you're going to come out of this is who you are. I don't believe that the process of how you're created is the primary way of looking at who you are. I think it's one of them. But when God tells you, you are my child, you are an heir, you are the royal priesthood, you are the chosen people, there's many, many, many messages He's giving us to there than just an evolutionary biologist who's telling you, you are the product of a random process that didn't even have you in mind. I think that's the biggest problem. When somebody comes and says that that process did not have you in mind, I think at that point he's not studying the science. He's philosophically judging that process. There's nothing in the science of evolution that can tell you whether or not that the outcome would have been guaranteed or not, because that cannot be scientifically proven. I think it's a matter of meaning, and I think this matter of meaning, if you believe you are a child of God, if you believe you've been put on this earth for a certain authority, you've been entitled a certain role, you will look very carefully about those bioethical dilemmas. You will look at the meaning of life differently. You will look at the value of life differently. You will look at the value of a personhood differently. I have very hard time against one of the most prominent bioethicists in the world in Princeton, Peter Singer, who says that a mentally handicapped person is not a person anymore. And that a chimp or a gorilla who can actually learn some tricks is more of a person than a mentally handicapped. I have big trouble with that. With all due respect, he is a very, very well respected bioethicist, and he has got amazing contribution to give to society. But I think his definition of personhood and its meaning is very, very problematic. And lastly, I think when you look at where you came from, it's going to be a big time determining where you're going to go. I think there is a matter of destiny there. If you believe you're a product of random chance, if you believe you're a product of just mere dust, and it ends, the material world ends with your death, there is nothing that survives you. What are you looking forward next? I think your destiny is a big question. And destiny is not only a philosophical question. I think it's a biological question. Because where you were created from is going to determine where you're going to go after that. So I think it is a very, very strong biological question. And I always tell people, Pascal had a wager. I'm sure you guys know of it. But he was struggling with this. He was struggling with the unknown. And he made a wager. He said very simply, well, you know what? Let's say you're an unbeliever in God. Okay? You don't believe in God's existence. Well, you're going to gamble. If you gamble that God doesn't exist, and He doesn't exist, well, you win. Good for you. But let's say there is 1 out of 10 chance He might exist, and you find out in eternity, you lost big. Let's say you're on the other side, that you actually believe that God exists, and you put all you wager everything that God exists, and you end up that, you know what, truly He exists. You won it all. Let's say hypothetically He doesn't exist. What have you necessarily lost? Not much. The problem is that nowadays there is a third option, and this option is becoming really, really troublesome, called the agnostic. And surprisingly, even within science, because of the challenges of science, because of the uncertainty of science, because of the lot of enigmas that science present to us, you get both competing sides. A lot of scientists right now don't like what Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris are doing. They don't like this kind of extreme atheism. Why? Because they would be honest with themselves and say, you know what, we don't have enough to be that extreme as you are. Hence, we will prefer to be agnostic and say, you know what, I just don't know from a scientific standpoint. Okay, I'm a scientist. I'm trained to look at evidence. I'm trained to look at experimentation. I'm trained to look at data. If you show me the data that God exists, I might accept it. But since there is no data that can do that, I'll be an agnostic. And I don't know. And they think it is actually okay to be neutral. But I don't believe that that neutrality is sustainable. I always give the example of living in Minnesota, or even up here, when you guys had in Buffalo, what was it, like 6 feet, in one night? Let's say you're up camping, up on the mountain, and you get a snowstorm. And this snowstorm is said, you know what, it's an avalanche. There's just absolutely, it's going to wipe out everything on there. And then you're given an option of 2 roads. One road that either takes you to a cliff where you'll fall to your death, or the other road takes you to base camp safely. And you got to pick one of those 2 roads based on your best intention, best knowledge. It's a wager, just like Pascal's wager. Either you fall to your death, or you get to base camp. That would be the atheist and the believer. You know what would the agnostic do? He'd say, I don't have enough information. I'm just going to stay in the snowstorm up there. Well, what's your destiny? You're going to end up dying as well. So I do not believe that agnosticism is in of itself, by staying neutral, is safe. Because God has given us enough information to make up our minds. So when he asked, what is truth? Pascal also said something very interesting. People almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. And he said this, and 200 to 300 years after that, it's becoming very more true. In this debate in this country, people are getting to the truth on basis of what they want to hear. When you look at actually knowledge in this side of the world, knowledge is very interesting. There is actually a whole field of study called epistemology. How do people know? And if you make knowledge as a scale from impossible to certain, okay, 0 means that there is absolutely no knowledge, okay, we cannot get to anything, and 1, you're absolutely certain. The agnostic will tell you it's impossible. You can't know anything. The skeptic would tell you that everything is unlikely. The dogmatic would tell you it's certain. And underneath that, I would say some very, very strong opinionated atheists. They're absolutely certain. You can tell them, well, did your science give you that inclination? There's nothing in science that you can say that disproves God. But yet, they're absolutely certain. Would you like to know where do I put the faithful, the believer? I don't put them at 1. I put them at here. Likely. Because faith is not knowledge. Faith is in the unseen. In this world is likely. If we had all the knowledge that we would be certain, we would not be in this world right now. We would be up there. And surprisingly, that kind of jump from likely to certain, that same faith exists for the believer and the non-believer. So the non-believer, just like the famous book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, the atheist sometimes goes on that faith from being likely to certain, say, you know what, I'm absolutely certain that God does not exist.